All right, I wanted to go over what it means to do a concept map. This is a method of mapping out different ideas or concepts in a way that shows the relationship between those ideas, and it helps your brain kind of create these meaningful connections, and it will ultimately help you kind of understand how everything fits together into the big picture. Okay, now there's several different ways that you could do a concept map, and concept maps can look different, and they could be a little bit more messy or complex, or sometimes they're really simple. I like to think of concept maps as having multiple levels. Okay, so you always start with your level 1, which is the title. So that just depends on your subject. So if you're talking about, types of animals, then you would put types of animals in here, or types of macromolecules, you would put that at the very center of the page, or sometimes you put it at the top if you're doing kind of a flowing thing. But for most of our concept maps, we're going to put the title at the center of the page, and we're going to branch off some of the main subcategories. Okay, so if you were doing molecules, you would branch that off into proteins and nucleic acids and lipids, and so you would break these off into carbohydrates and so on and so forth. You'd break those into the largest subcategories. Okay, and then you refine each of those categories, and you give different descriptions of each of those categories, and maybe the blue kind of shows the difference between each of them. And then you can even go further and describe those subcategories. So you're basically categorizing and describing or giving examples of each of the categories that belong to those. Okay, so let's walk through an example of how you create a concept map. Let's go with birds. Okay, so let's do the topic birds. We're going to make a concept map about those. Okay, so to start off your first level, you would let's talk maybe about the characteristics that make birds birds. So this is just kind of a description about birds. So we're going to branch off everything that we know about the characteristics of birds off of this category here. Okay, well, I know that there are several different characteristics, so maybe I'm going to draw several different categories here. Okay, so I know that they have feathers, so that's a characteristic of birds. I know that they have a 4-chambered heart. Okay, and so I can put words on my lines as I branch out to these different concepts to kind of make them a little bit more meaningful. Okay, I know there's several other characteristics of birds, okay, and some, most of them can fly, some of them can't, okay, but mostly they have the characteristic of flying, and those that can't fly probably lost that ability. Except penguins, maybe they always couldn't, I don't know. Another characteristic is that they have hard-shelled eggs, and so their eggs aren't soft, but they have hard shells, okay, and so they lay those. So these are some of the characteristics, and each of these characteristics are branching off of the characteristics category, okay? So this helps me make sense, and so this concept map is in effect saying, birds have many characteristics. Some of those characteristics is that some have feathers, most but not all fly, they all have a light skeleton, so on and so forth, okay? Now, I can refine this even further and describe things like my light skeleton. I know it's light because it has a bunch of air spaces, okay? And the light skeleton allows them to fly, and so I'm going to put that as a subcategory as well. So I can add details to each of these little categories. So characteristics have a light skeleton, air spaces allows flying, okay? So I can contains, which contains, all right, so I can add the words there to those, okay? So I can do this I could just keep on going and describing birds using this method, okay? So a way that I would read this is there are many types of birds. An example of some flightless birds would include an ostrich. Ostriches are the largest birds, and they live in Africa. Other flightless birds are kiwis, okay? There are some examples of birds that are farm birds. Farm birds might include ducks. Ducks are also in the category of water birds, okay? And then you can go all sorts of directions here, okay? So this concept map allows us to use a lot of ideas in a little space, and it's not an outline, so you can always go back and add more information. You're never going to run out of space. I can add more info here, over here. I can do that at any time. Now, these connections show a method of reasoning, and if you do the connections wrong, then that would actually not help you learn the connections, okay? So let's go over an example of how you would not do this, okay? So we start off with our birds here, and I could draw my category here as examples, okay? So I'm going to go for examples of birds. And I'm going to write out some examples. So I know kiwi is an example of birds. I know ostrich, that's an example of a bird. Penguin, that's a type of bird. Ducks, okay, so ducks are types of birds. So I've got all of these concepts, and I got to relate these somehow together. So I'm going to draw a line from my examples to the ostrich, and then what if I drew a line from ostrich to penguin? And then I'm just going to form a chain here and draw all these lines here, okay? So all of these lines are branching off of examples, but this is a problem, because here I have penguins are being drawn from an ostrich. What is that saying? That's telling me that a penguin is a type of ostrich, and that ducks and kiwis are types of penguins. Do you see that method of reasoning there? That's incorrect. Okay, that is not how I would draw a concept map. I'm not showing the proper relationship between these ideas. Okay, if I wanted to show the proper relationship, I'd have to draw a separate line from examples to penguin, from examples to duck, and from examples to kiwi. Okay, so I couldn't do this because this is incorrect. This is saying penguins are types of ostriches. Okay, and that's not what we want because that's not correct. Okay, so let's go for another example of what not to do. Okay, I could start off with my birds, and let's start describing some of the characteristics of birds again. Okay, so I know that birds have feathers. Okay, now what if I started branching off all of these other concepts about birds? I know that they have hard-shelled eggs. I know that they fly. I know they have a four-chambered heart. I know they have a light skeleton, okay? What if I branched all of these off of feathers? Oh, that's not good either, because that is in effect saying that the fact that they have hard-shelled eggs is because they have feathers, or they have a four-chambered heart, which is a type of feather, or something like that, okay? That doesn't help. Flying, this one makes sense, because maybe I'd write the words here, allow it to fly. So have feathers which allow it to fly. That makes sense. But I would not say birds have many characteristics, including feathers, which gives them hard-shelled eggs. That doesn't make any sense, okay? So we would not branch those off there. Neither would we form a chain like this. This is also not something that we would do, because the way you would read this is it would say birds have many characteristics. One of those characteristics is that it has feathers. Feathers allow it to fly. Because it flies, it lays hard-shelled eggs, which give it a light skeleton, and that means that it has a four-chambered heart, so on and so forth. That doesn't make any sense, okay? It doesn't have hard-shelled eggs because it flies. Those two concepts aren't really related, okay? And plus, I don't have words here showing the relationship between the ideas. So simply forming a nice little chain like this doesn't actually show the relationship between ideas, and that's not a good idea, okay? This is how you would represent those ideas, okay? They have feathers. They can all fly. They have a four-chambered heart, okay? They lay hard-shelled eggs. These are all examples of characteristics, but they're not all examples of feathers, okay? Because here the problem is I'm saying all of these are characteristics of feathers. That's wrong, okay? Here I'm saying these are all simply characteristics, and that's the right idea, okay? So that's how you would draw a concept map.